before I came to India, Dristadumya Swami, who was at the time on Radha Damodar, who actually got me from college a couple of years before, he had asked me if I would like to have the opportunity for my parents to come and meet with Srila Prabhupada with his parents. Because my father was a captain in the United States Navy, and I believe his father was also served in the Navy, and he wanted the parents to be able to find some commonality. And so he asked me, and I was honored. I said, "Are you kidding me? Of course." And I didn't know whether my parents would be agreeable, but I found out later that they also were just extremely honored to. My mother said, she said, "Of course, this wonderful man, we don't know what they didn't know anything about Indian culture, they didn't know anything about anything." But my mother was cultured enough to realize that he must be some extraordinary man. This whole movement is coming together under his guidance. And so they came to the New York temple. It was, I can't remember if it was before or after the parade, but it was within a couple of weeks on either side. And, you know, my parents came with Dristadumya's parents were there. And I had already decided that what could I possibly ask? Prabhupada gave instructions, follow his instructions. Anything I would ask would probably be foolish and stupid. So I figured my duty was to just listen with both ears and be very careful to pay attention to what was going on. And to give my parents a chance, because my mother had gone through this shock that I had dropped out of college 6 months before I was going to graduate. She had kind of come comfortable with that. But still, you know, she was, what's going on here? And Prabhupada just totally charmed her. They asked the typical questions, well, what is my son going to do? He has no education. He's going to serve Krishna. I said, but. And then Prabhupada said, your son is doing the highest service to the world. Don't you worry. Krishna will take care of everything. And somehow she understood it. My dad was sitting in there. He wasn't asking so much, but he was gleaning like, oh, I think I like this now. And so at the end, and I didn't say anything. I was just watching the whole thing unfold. Sometimes I regret saying I could have had some conversation, but no, I think I did the right thing. I listened. And then it was over. Prabhupada instructed, I believe Harisari was there, and he said, you give them the garland. And so they put the garland over my father and my mother, and they wore the garland down, and I think they gave some prasad, a little, you know, some sweet or something like that. And they went down, and the parking lot in New York where they had parked the car was a block down around the corner or something, because you can't park on the streets in New York. And when they walked in, my father told me, as soon as they walked in, because they still had the garlands on, they go, oh, you've gone to see the Swami. And so the parking lot attendant knew that Prabhupada was somewhere up in one of the top story buildings in Manhattan. And my father was like, whoa, this is, he was very impressed by that. But the wonderful thing about this is that, you know, I was thinking, okay, that's over. But the wonderful thing was that my mother had been doing a lot of freelance writing. She's very academically astute with writing, and she'd write haiku poems, and she'd send them into the newspapers and stuff like that. And I had no idea she was doing this, but she went home, and she wrote this article, and she submitted it to the New York Times. And it was like the suburban issue, which was, the New York Times is this big, huge newspaper. And it would have all these inserts, and, you know, it would have all these, and so they had a section called the Suburbia Today, which was sort of a special section about what goes on in suburbia New York. And they accepted my mother's article, and it has the photograph of me getting initiated. It's a fantastic photograph with me getting initiated in Vrindavan, and Prabhupada's reaching out, and I'm reaching out, getting my beads, right on the main first page. And it said, our son joined Hare Krishna. And I was actually in Juhu Beach. I think it came out in 1981. I was building a Roth cart here in Juhu Beach. And she mailed me a copy of it. And I looked at it and I went, oh my goodness. Because it was about 2 or 3 years later that the article finally got put in the newspaper. And I was just floored. I brought tears to my eyes because my mom, I think it was you know, all of her years of writing all these little articles about traveling and just interesting. This was her magnum opus. It was her tour de force. You know, it was just and it was a long article too. And it talked all about how for so many years I drove her crazy because I had long hair and she didn't like it. My father had shaved head or very short hair, Navy haircut, you know. And there's a part in there where she was laughing. My dad was laughing because she said, when I came home, of course, I had long hair one day, and the next day it was all shaved off. And she said, what happened to your hair? And I said, well, Mom, you wanted me to cut it. And my father said that. He said, you wanted me to cut it, and he cut it. And she said, I didn't want him to cut it all. So there was all these very nice little pieces in the article. It was charming, the article. And she actually said in the article, she said, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami charmed me, and she expressed it through her own words, how he touched her heart. And the most amazing part about this story is that, so I asked her, and then apparently the New York Times, I don't know, I think this is probably what they do, they syndicated it, so it was printed in New York and Chicago, Los Angeles, Houston. I mean, all the places where the New York Times has newspaper outlets reporting, they sent it there. So it got literally published all over the United States. I think it was in November 1981. And so I was like, wow, you know, Mom, you really did it. And I asked her, I said, so did you get any feedback? I mean, printed all over the United States. And this is the most amazing thing. She said, are you kidding me? She said, the morning it came out in the newspaper, the phone did not stop ringing. I was getting phone calls from every city across America. And she said, as soon as I put the phone down, I'd barely get back in my seat and the phone would ring and I'd pick it up again. Because at that time, the Hare Krishna movement, I think the older devotees know, there was a lot of controversy. We had just won a big lawsuit in New York about the Hare Krishna movement is actually a legitimate religion. But the people were still like, what is this weird cult? And so there was a lot of concerned adults and parents that were concerned. Their kids were reading all this stuff about Asia and India and, you know, these mantras and stuff like that. They didn't know. So she was fielding all of these questions. So I said to her, I said, well, how many of the phone calls were phone calls from parents that were appreciative of your article or neutral, or maybe, you know, why your son has joined a cult? How can you possibly be feeling good about this? You know, people that were very inimical, because there was a lot of people like that. And she told me, she said, the overwhelming majority of the phone calls were positive, and there were some that were neutral. They were just curious. And I said, but how about negative ones? She said, in the 2 weeks that the phone was ringing, she said she only got 2 phone calls that were, you know, people that were disturbed, and, you know, your son is a cult, he's been brainwashed, and I don't know. But I thought that was really amazing that she did that service, and it was very successful.